Are we going? All right, so we're going. Hopefully you can hear us now. I apologize if I've suddenly blown out your eardrum, kicked out. So we'll wait for just a second here and see if things are picking up properly and going from where they should be. So anyway, while we're waiting about that, as I was saying in the initial portion before, when our audio wasn't working, Swordfish was this weekend. And so if you didn't watch it, the live stream is available on YouTube on the Gothenburg Historical Fencers webpage. Excuse me. Yeah, that's the right one. And it was an interesting stream. Seiji was saying that he really enjoyed, what was it?
Yeah, in the beginning of the video, they have a I think it's an exhibition of a new rule set.
Right,
the historical fencing.
Yeah, the continuous combat rules, or whatever they were called.
And that was my favorite part of it.
Right.
And Ted, you were mentioning the ringen
Yeah,
heavyweight.
I really like the heavyweight ringen matches. That was a lot of fun watching the crowd favorite handily get taken down numerous times by, I think both guys have a deep judo background, and it was a lot of fun. But the reason we're talking about it this week is because of all of the debate surrounding the Longsword Final. Okay, the gold match came down to well, there's been a lot of debate about it. Whether it was it cheap? Was it somehow kind of a trick that the person was using? If you didn't watch the video, we actually have an image of the very final engagement that happened in it right here that we'll go ahead and throw up. This image was from Matt Gallus capturing a still. It's kind of hard to tell, I know, in the still, but Ivan Novichenko, the Russian fencer, throughout the first part, do I still have audio going? Make sure it's still, okay, cool. Throughout the first part of the match, was using a lot of one-handed strikes. Now, he also had competed in a number of one-handed weapons, I believe rapier and saber he was in, and he obviously has, a lot more background in that one-handed technique, but when he came out in longsword, he was throwing one-handed strikes left and right. And so this has brought us back to a lot of debate that's been going on. So, let's talk about one-handed strikes, right? Are they cheap? Are they fair? Are they something? Is it HEMA, right? Seiji, you had some thoughts on this particular topic.
Yeah, I had some thoughts as well. So one of the things that came up, a lot of people, especially on the Facebook group, if you look, is some people are saying, oh no, one-handed cuts don't exist. And so, yes, they do. And I know in our school, one of the cuts that we accept them, one of the one-handed attacks we accept mostly is the thrust as opposed to the cut. So like for me, I would never want to face Ivan in fencing or otherwise in another situation. Like I wouldn't want to be hit by a wooden club or a misaligned longsword strike. But one of the things that I had a qualms with was whether the judges called the strikes correctly, if there was edge alignment, and if they can't feasibly, maybe they shouldn't allow such strikes, because when it comes to these videos, any fencing videos or tournaments, the thing I look for is, did I learn something about better fencing as the old masters kind of saw it, where they're performing technique with proper mindset of not only just self-defense, but self-betterment, as opposed to trying to win a game. And at the end of the day, I wasn't particularly impressed by the fencing. This is not to say what I think about the individual fencers. It's more of because of the rule sets and just the mindset that going in. I just wasn't interested in it at all, and I just don't think it was particularly overall good fencing. So.
Okay, so Seiji absolutely comes down on the side of it wasn't good fencing. For myself, I find it a little bit more complex of a question, right? That question of should one-handed shots be thrown or not? Now, there's definitely evidence for them. I threw together a little image that shows, a couple of the different one-handed strikes that you'll find from a variety of sources. Meyer shows a one-handed strike, and of all places, the pike in his staff section. Right at the top there, we have a one-handed thrust with the pike is really what's going on. Certainly not a swinging strike with a one-handed weapon like that, but just a couple of pages earlier, he describes numerous one-handed strikes with a quarterstaff, which also should be a trainer for the halberd. So we do have some one-handed strikes being introduced. Having said that, I don't care if it's with the edge or not. I don't want to get cracked in the head with a quarterstaff swinging at my head, at my ankle, anything like that. We also have an image there from the classic, right, from Talhofer, Das Geisland, the classic one-handed, left-handed strike to the ankle. So there is an example of a cut. And then we have a thrust from Degrassi, again with one hand. So we know that one-handed strikes are something that exist with larger weapons, whether it's a longsword, whether it's a great sword, you know, Montante style, Spadone style weapon, whether it's a quarterstaff or even a pike. We know that people were using one-handed strikes with them. But the question then comes for the tournament, was the use of the one-handed strike appropriate? Was it something that should have been allowed? Should the rules have not allowed for it? And this is where it gets a little bit more fraught. Personally, I think both fencers were great. Seiji didn't want to fight him. Both guys are very talented, obviously, right? To get to that point with that kind of pressure, no question that they're talented. But was it good fencing? Was it fencing that we want to see? Not that they aren't good fencers, but was it good fencing? The biggest complaint I have for it is there's a lot of digital ink that's spilled about the complaint of tournaments and, you know, the sportification of what we do. This is what sportification looks like, in my opinion. That final match turned into sport HEMA. It turned into the thing that we don't really want to do. Yeah, the techniques exist, but they're a really small subset of the available techniques. And when they become your entire game, you're playing a game, right? Do you want to come in, throw a one-handed strike, and then run away, you know, with your back to your opponent as you run out of the ring to get distance, you know, while you wait for the judge's staff to fall? I don't know that that's something that I want to do. I certainly know that's not something that I want to be training my guys to do. At the end of the day, I think it was great that Dennis, you know, managed to come ahead and pretty handily finish the match with a quality strike.
Yes, and on your note, Ted, on sportification, I wasn't so much fixated on the one-handed strike. I don't care about the one-handed strike. My biggest qualm was, despite you have these very talented fencers at a high level, keep in mind this was for first and second place, I saw a lot of doubling, a lot of people falling over, getting out of the ring, a lot of these kind of doubling flurries, very immobile footwork. And yes, in those contexts of fighting in a high pressure situation under the rule sets, it takes skill, but I'm not sure if as a community what we're trying to learn, if those skills under those rule sets, determined by those rule sets, are really relevant to recreating the martial arts that we're trying to learn.
Yeah, I mean, that is actually a really good point. I think that's the takeaway from this. I know some people that watch this will compete in tournaments. Some people don't compete in tournaments. But if you are, look at the rule set. I've fought in tournaments that use modified forms of the Nordic Rules. And again, if you're not familiar with the Nordic Rules, it's relatively simple. They score everything that lands, with the difference in points being what's awarded. So if Seiji and I strike each other in the chest or in the arm, we each are scored 2 points. There's no difference, so the score remains 0. If Seiji strikes me in the head and I get him in the arm or the body, then he earns 1 point over that because it was a 3-point target to a 2-point target. What, in my experience, this rule set leads to is just diving in there, right? Like, there are numerous situations where really your best bet is to try and eat a shot maybe to your ribs in the hope that you can land a strike on your opponent's head. You know, and it is that gaming of the system. And again, at a high level, it's impressive physicality. It's something that, you know, can be respected for what it is, but is it what we as a community want to do? All right. Again, no disrespect to the people involved. They're both very talented fencers. I have zero question of that. But it really comes down to those of us that are organizing events, those of us that are promoting events. Is this what we want? To which I say no. I say, look at your rule set and watch the fighting that occurs. And if you're getting double after double after double, yeah, that might be the fault of the fencers, but it can very well be the fault of your rule set. You mentioned the beginning kind of demonstration that they did of the continuous fighting rules, right? Those are, if you've never fought in a historic style Fech School event, they're very similar to that. The Historic Fech School has variety of different rule sets, but one of them is that it's a very organic system. Fencers come in, they fight each other, and they withdraw, and that is one of their exchanges, and they might get a set number of those, maybe 3, maybe 5, maybe 7, and the overall winner of those exchanges is the person that wins. Now, in history, it was really, really easy. If I get a bleeding head wound and Seiji doesn't have a bleeding head wound, I've lost. Modern takes on this usually will have judges, you know, counting landed blows and going from there. Madtown Fech School in Madison, Wisconsin, here in the United States, they run a tournament based on that rule set and have had really, really good results. So, you know, that's one way to address the issue, because you make it an organic process. The fencers come in, one person decides to engage, the engagement happens, and then somebody abzooks, somebody withdraws, and that's the end of that section. So, you know, things to think about, I guess, is what we're talking about today with this initial spot, is that, you know, even if you're not into tournaments, there's something to be learned from it, and that can be as simple as, wow, that's not the kind of fencing that I want to see from my school, from my class, from my people. All right, so we're running a little behind now because of our audio issues earlier, so let's go ahead and move on to our technique this week. It's gonna All right, so the Sturtzhauw. The reason we decided to talk about this week is, you know, we've been talking about kind of deceptions, and that leads into provocations. Now, there are numerous videos out there on the Sturtzhauw at this point, but I remember back to my first days of reading through Meyer and wondering, what the hell is the Sturtzhauw, right? It's such a simple thing, but when you first read it, especially if you only stick to the longsword, it can kind of be confusing as to what Meyer is talking about with the Sturz. Now, important on this, you're not going to see a lot of engagement between Seiji and I today, because the Sturtzhauw, Meyer notes, is something that is primarily used in the Zufechten. It's something that's going to be used in the approach. We're not actually going to use it very much to land a blow. It is an Oberhau. It is an Oberhau with the short edge. Now, there's a couple of those, right? The Schielhau is an Oberhau with the short edge. Absolutely. But instead of thinking about it as the Schielhau, think of it as a short-edged Zornhau. That's how I like to think of this initially to get into it, is imagine that I'm going to do a Zornhau, and I'm going to do it with the short edge, right? So Seiji, you're going to do a Zornhau with the short edge. How are you going to do that? Right? Like, what do you think?
Step, maybe?
Sure, but how are you going to do it? Right? So we're going to come through, and we're going to put that point in the face. And that's what we're looking for on this technique. As we draw up, and we're going to strike in, we want that plunging over from above that threatens the face. And realistically here, we're looking, you know, maybe for some kind of response for Seiji. Is it a strong strike? Do I expect to come in and cleave through him? Well, at that point, I'm basically doing a Krumpau, and I would target his right shoulder or across his line. And yeah, it's really, really similar to the Krumpau as far as the general motions, but it's a very specific application. The easiest way to think about it is it's a way to come into ox, and Meyer tells us that if we come into this position and we don't jab forward into a thrust with it, that we're just in the ox. So if I strike from above and then thrust forward, right, I'm completing my Sturtzhauw, my plunging cut, and turning it into a thrust. But if I just come over and reach forward with it, at that point, I'm in the ox. And that's really all it is. It's a really simple technique today. It didn't need a lot of time. But it's one of those ones that, you know, when you're just starting out, can be confusing, because you read through and you're like, what is this? So think of it as that motion that just plunges over from the top. That's really what we're looking at here on it.
Any technical? So Ted mentioned the action, but so you do this into Zufechten where you're not in, like, per se, a one-step distance to cut in. So this is where you're not, neither of you are in a threat range. And what happens a lot is that fencers, they kind of stand still very statically, and by doing so, you kind of telegraph what you're doing, but by changing off and doing a Sturtzhauw, looping around, going short edge, long edge, and master motions. And I remember when I first started fencing in my second year, I fenced an opponent who was doing all these Sturtzhauws, and I didn't know what to do. I was completely paralyzed because of he was masking his motions, and because I was paralyzed by his continuous masking motion, he was able to get the vor continuously just get my head. So.
Right. So we want to make sure when we're looking at that do it from out of range, right? If I'm this far from Seiji, I'm not going to do my Sturtzhauw here, right? Yeah, great, I've missed him, I haven't reached him, it's a little too close. At that point, I need to actually getting close enough to hit him. But it can be a great way to come in and disguise from out of range, and maybe I reach over, and if I get a response from him, then I will capitalize on that response. But if I come through and he does nothing, I might just continue my action around. Okay? So for your Sturtzhauw, really this is an example of a secondary cut. Don't overthink it. Okay? That's really what we're looking at on this one is you're going to come from above, you're going to plunge that point right in their face, reach forward with it, right? And really send it over from on top.
It's a type of setup for Zufectant. So think of that way.
Right. So just come in with it. It's one of those basic, simple techniques. This one has been easy this week. We decided not, hopefully, to have something to argue about after the last couple of weeks. So hopefully everybody enjoys this one. I do apologize for our technical issues at the start today. Do we have any questions? Nah, just some question, commentary. Lovely. All right, guys. So we'll look at what was going on with our audio, and hopefully one of these days, I know I say it, that we're going to get this all squared away. The single biggest headache that I have is figuring out why it hasn't been working for us.
The biggest controversy of our videos.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you for sticking with us on that as we've dealt with it. Next week, we'll do a technique that spends a little bit more ink that we need to talk about with it and a little bit more debate and discussion and something that'll get into a little bit more technical. But this week we just wanted to cover an easy one. So if we don't have any questions, then as always, if you can, hit that like button. If you haven't subscribed to us, please subscribe. And we'll see you next week on HEMAchat.